This is the Counselling Insights Podcast, a podcast to help you develop your own insights and practices as you listen to Vicki Enns connect with counselors and helping professionals about their work, their passions, and their strategies.
Welcome to another episode of the Counselling Insights Podcast. My name is Vicki Enns and I am your host. Joining me today is Jolene Haida. Jolene is of Métis, Ukrainian, and European ancestry. She is a PhD candidate at York University, where she specializes in Indigenous social work and decolonial approaches to teaching and learning. Jolene is a registered social worker and trauma therapist with over 25 years of leadership experience in community, government, and healthcare settings. Currently, Jolene is a trainer with Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute, and she owns a private practice focusing on combining Indigenous knowledge, land-based practices, and trauma-focused therapy. In today's conversation, we explore how to understand colonization and decolonization as both big ideas and also day-to-day tangible parts of every person's experience. Jolene shares stories and examples of how we can start with our own experience, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to be engaging in decolonizing our minds and our roles as helpers. And we start to explore how we can blend Indigenous ways of healing with more Western, European, and academic traditions to engage in more reciprocal and connected conversations. Welcome, Jolene.
Hi, it's so good to be here. It's always funny when I hear my bio read to me. I go,
Yes.
who's that?
Yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah.
Who's that? I'm just me.
Well,
yeah,
and it's
good to be here.
Missing
It's
like
good to see you.
97% of you too, right? But highlighting some key things. So really glad to have this chance to just talk to you. And so please, and I did want to acknowledge it because it just adds to the significance. I think I know our listeners are going to be listening to this on all kinds of different days, but you and I are having this conversation on September 30th, which in Canada is our National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. And so that just adds to me the significance of chatting with you on this topic today.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's a topic that I'm hoping is on people's minds. I just want to say, Niwagamantik, Tanzania Buzu. Hello to all my relations out there, any Indigenous folks who might be tuning in. So, Chimigwech, it's good to be here.
Yeah, wonderful. And you and I were, just before we hit record, we were chatting and commiserating about the beautiful autumn weather. And I was just thinking about that. I spent a little time outside this morning, and it's a beautiful September day. And it always, this time of year, it always does make me think about it's kind of like the beginning of the year. It's the start of the end of the year. And it certainly makes me think about kids returning to school and that time of year. And so there's just that real significance to truth and reconciliation, and for really remembering the children, right?
Yeah. And the adults, the children who are now the adults, and then those who are inheritors of that colonial trauma that came with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that is a large part of what we're here to talk about today. But before we get into that, just to check in with you, you were saying a little bit about where you are this morning, but so our listeners get to know you just a little bit more. Do you want to say a bit either where you are today or where you're living and working and your spot?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now I am in Haudenosaunee, Huron-Wendat, Mississaugas of the Credit territory. And I am just coming back. I had the pleasure of being hosted in Treaty 3, actually with CTRI. We did some work with the folks in Sioux Lookout. Such an honor to be up there. Beautiful space. I think Sioux Lookout probably has some of the most beautiful sunsets that I've seen in Canada. It's absolutely stunning, and really working with the folks up there who are doing incredible work. So it was an honor to be there. And then spent some time in Thunder Bay. That's where I was born and raised. I was born and raised in a little community outside of
Mhm.
Thunder Bay called Kakabeka Falls. And so some of your listeners might be
Yeah.
familiar with it, but a lot probably weren't. So it was really good to be back
Yeah.
home on the land that raised me. I still very much, even though I'm in Southern Ontario, I still very much connect to that
Yeah.
land. So
Yeah.
it was great to be on the
Right.
land
Yeah.
and be up there. Yeah.
That's lovely. And maybe just to ask you a little bit about, in your bio, even though, like we said, it's a snippet of who you are. However,
Mm-hmm.
representing significant amount
Mm-hmm.
of your energy and time and attention right now. I think it sounds like you
Mm-hmm.
have, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe still currently wear many different hats, and you're
Yep.
completing a PhD. And so,
Mm.
how are you finding blending those hats? Do you feel like they're starting to knit together into something? So you just have one hat?
Well, you know what? I think that, no, I think that's funny. I think that's a really good question. And I think about when, and perhaps, our listeners who are social workers and
Yeah.
counselors and therapists will think about how we're often working within systems that position us as
Mm,
fragmented, as separate, so that we do wear separate
yeah.
hats, right? We have different roles and we have different parts of ourself that are maybe sort of more welcomed to show up in certain areas. And so I think I really struggled with that when I came back to do my PhD, and I was doing comprehensive exams, which really is like wading through a
Mm,
whole bunch of literature about your topic. And I was really struggling with feeling so fragmented and so separated. And so one of the things I purposely did was I started to revisit traditional languages that my
ah,
ancestors would have
mhm.
spoken. And one of them is Moose Cree, and the other one is Michif. And I came across a saying in Michif, Nikishkusin, and it means I
Mm,
remember. And that became really significant for me because I wanted to make sure that I remembered not only the challenges and the struggles that I went through, because I firmly believe that lived experience is one of our best teachers, but I also wanted to make sure that I remembered where I'm from, my
mm,
relatives and
mhm.
relations, my ancestral
Yeah.
knowledge, the land that raised me, and allow those to continue to show up no matter what space I'm in. So that became really important. And I also purposely took breaks from, reading literature and trying to write about these really big topics. And I purposely took breaks and went back home and went out on the
Mm,
land. And I think that that is like a homecoming for me. And that really helps remember who I am, and that it's not someone who happens to be pursuing academia or happens to be, a formal helper in a lot of ways, but someone who is just really deeply connected to land and
mm.
spirit. And so it's an interesting
Yeah.
question when we think about all these different
Right.
places that we belong
Yeah.
to, and really allowing ourselves to like integrate and show up fully as we are in all those
Yeah.
places.
I really appreciate you use that question to kind of just unpack that idea a little bit. I really appreciate that perspective, and I love that. And it does sound, as you talk about it, it's like, okay, yeah, I can hear. It sounds like you kind of found that way to anchor yourself so that you don't feel so
hmm I
fragmented.
think that's
Hmm.
I think that's really important. And when we talk about decolonizing, we'll
Yeah.
talk about that
Yeah.
more, like how it's really about a fragmentation of
Mm.
ourselves. And Nikishkison for me was about memory, like very visceral
Yeah.
memory, like blood memory, and then um, implicit and explicit memory, but also about remembering,
Yeah.
like weaving back together parts of
Yeah.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's busy. And I think, like many of the listeners, lots of
Yeah.
juggling, lots of different,
Yeah.
different relationships. There's always, I feel, so much that I want to
Yeah.
do. Yeah. And just trying to balance out, okay, how am I going to do all of the
Yeah,
things that
yeah,
I want to do?
absolutely. It's funny. I
Yeah.
was just thinking that like yesterday, sitting on my deck, having that feeling like, is this the way it's supposed to be? It always feels like there's no way I'm ever gonna be able to do everything I want to do. But I always try to recognize the gift in that, in terms of, it's a good problem to have. Right?
How lucky we are.
Lots of things to be excited about, lots of relationships to tap into. It's yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's dig into this topic. We've been noting a little bit that so just to frame this a little bit, I reached out to you about this topic recently, particularly because you are involved in organizing your thoughts on this and creating a workshop on this. And so we'll come back to maybe talking about that later too, specifically the workshop. But it's called Decolonizing Helping Relationships, Essential Skills for Change. And it's all about these topics you've been mentioning: colonization, decolonization. And so we want to unpack some of the ideas of this workshop, or just these of these concepts together. And you were noting before we started, you just made the comment that there are so many different ways to approach these ideas. So many. Maybe I'll hand it to you in terms of, where would you like to start? Where does it make sense to start?
Wow, that's a really good question. Okay.
I can offer help.
Okay, where should we start? Yeah. Well, and I think that our starting point, and I'll just speak like very personally. So my starting point is always with regrounding, reconnecting to land and spirit and who I am. And I think that when we think about what is colonization and what is settler colonialism, because they're similar but different, I think that sometimes those words are either not used enough, or maybe used so much that they just lose their meaning, right? Like when you use a word over and over and over again, you forget about how much violence is really inherent in that word. Yeah. So when I think about that, and I think about coming back to myself, I think about how important it is that we start with ourselves. And when we were sort of thinking about and talking about at CTRI, like what might this workshop look like? What might, this kind of work look like? It really comes back to starting to unpack your own ways that you've been colonized. Because whether we're Indigenous, non-Indigenous, I'm from mixed ancestry. So I always feel like I'm kind of a little bit of both. Where part of my lineage is a settler lineage, right? Where we settled here, and then part of my lineage would have been original inhabitants of the land. So, and I think a lot of people find themselves in that, and whether we're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, we have all been colonized in different ways. And so it's really taking a look and starting to unpack what that has looked like in our own lives and in our training as helpers, right? So we start first, and then we start to work ourselves out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that gets right at, one question. I did think of some possible questions to start us off, but I'm glad I handed it off over to you. But one of them was kind of, who do you imagine this workshop for? But I think you just answered, like, it's all of us. Yeah. It's all of us.
And I think about it as, so there's a Michif word, Pimatatawen, and it means like a good life or a balanced life. And when I think about that, I think about how colonization has really interrupted that in different ways. And so we have to look at our own self, and then we also have to look collectively, right? At how has it infected. Actually, I was going to say impacted, but infected is actually a really good word. How it has kind of infected each other as well, and our ideas about our relationships with each other, and how that has been really impacted by colonization. And so we all have the responsibility to carry that work. All of us do. And I think especially, when we're thinking about it being today and it being a day for reflection, part of that reflection is turning inward, but then it's also turning
Yeah.
outward, and knowing that we have to continue the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's jump up into our heads for a moment. Perhaps let's tackle one of the big ones. So, can you?
Okay.
How would you define colonialism or colonization? Maybe those are two terms. Yeah.
So, I mean, essentially, it started with
Yeah.
land,
Yeah.
right? So, colonialism essentially is about one territory being invaded by another group of people who then appropriate the land, the people, and the resources for their own benefit. And so, when we think about that, we often think about that as something that happened, historically years ago. And then when we think about settler colonialism, the idea is that people stayed. So the colonizers stayed or settled and took over the land. But colonization and settler colonialism isn't a historical fact. It's an ongoing appropriation of people, of resources. It's often accompanied with violent policies and processes. And it's also about not just overtaking of resources or land or property, but it's really centering a different ideology, a different way of thinking. And so settlers would have brought that, their own understanding about what is truth, what is knowledge, what is important, what does it mean to be a person, right? And so colonization gets a little bit tricky because it's ongoing. So it's not something that happened before and that we can kind of look at from an arm's length. We have to look at, well, how is it actually continuing to act out, like in the ways that I think and, my belief systems. So it's actually like an ongoing, deeper process. Yeah. So I think it's work. It's good work. It's work that can be very painful and uncomfortable, but it's also work that can be exciting because I really believe that as we're doing the work, we're building the type of future that we want to have.
Yeah. Well, and maybe just to connect with that a little bit. I mean, as you start to define that a bit and fill in the picture, I think about I can connect in a little bit with my own personal story, and I
Yes.
that especially when I think my own opportunity to learn a little bit about colonization and settler colonization. My own family comes from they were immigrants in my grandparents' generation, came to the prairies as farmers from kind of Eastern Europe, and as I learned as an adult, this wasn't the story that was told when I was younger.
Because you probably got the colonial version.
I did, which is that the land was empty. There was nobody here.
Yeah.
And, come and my own family, they were fleeing things in their own history. But it was it was a time of opportunity. Right. And coming as farmers. And so coming to understand, it's like, oh, there's a whole lot that was left out in that story.
That moment of understanding, and sometimes I'll talk to people about that, and that can bring up a lot of emotion too. Yeah. About what was I inadvertently part of?
Yeah.
Because part of my ancestral lineage is we came as Ukrainian settlers. My grandfather was born in the Ukraine and brought over as a baby because they were encouraged to come over and settle or farm the land, and the Canadian government did that by design because then it really justified this kind of nationalism of this new country and that it was empty before, but we know that that's not true. But that whole ideology of terra nullius, land not being inhabited by humans. And then everything was just sort of continuing to be built on by that. But when we come to this understanding of how we might be implicated in that, right? There's some uncomfortable
Yeah.
feelings. And I think that's like an important
Yeah.
awareness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so,
Yeah.
and just to add one more thing, like, I mean, that's an ongoing journey for me personally, but even a little, if I expand that circle a little, I think one of the, in the last, in 2020, 2021, when we started height of COVID and my own family, I
Mm,
come from a big family. We live across Canada. And so we started doing Zooms in a regular way, as so many people did, but it turned into this really wonderful connection for us. But during that time, there was we had some conversations that we normally don't get around to because we don't see each other all that often, and we started to have some conversation about this topic within our own family, and all I'm just wanting to highlight how that really brought it to a life in me a little bit more of just my
hmm
own inner emotions and thoughts and feelings, but then within relationship and conversation with my family, people I love, and seeing them struggle when different people's questions and feelings. And so just really
hmm
appreciated the importance and how that made it feel, added so many layers to it as well, which were really partly
hmm
difficult and also really important, in terms of
hmm
just trying to
hmm
unpack this stuff, is do it within our relationships. And so
hmm
appreciated that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And how you started with yourself and with your
Yeah.
circle, and then it can like
Right.
reverberate
Yeah.
outwards,
Yeah.
right? Because now we're aware of it. And
Yeah.
um, Arundhati Roy says, once you're aware of it, whatever
Right.
it is, whatever
Yeah.
social
Mm,
injustice it is, now you can't be
right.
unaware.
Yeah.
So now you have to do
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and so maybe we should, what if then we shift to kind of that linked idea then, to bring it back to our listeners a little bit, perhaps, is the, how does this
Mhm.
relate in your mind to our helping roles? Yeah. How
Mhm.
might,
Yeah.
like, as you say, it's an ongoing, colonization is an ongoing reality. Can you give some examples of maybe how you think about that showing up in helping contexts? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I even think about, in one of my roles at the university is teaching and training the next generation of social
Mhm.
workers. And so I think one of the important things that we look at the history um, and the historical present of social work.
Yeah. Right.
So, and many fields, not
Right.
just
Yeah.
social work, medicine. There's so many different kinds of ways in which those those
Right.
fields have been impacted by colonial ideologies and racist viewpoints, and then how we have in turn sometimes really inadvertently
Right.
harmed. And so one of the reasons for decolonizing ourselves and our practice is that we can't undo the harm that's been done, but we're trying to prevent further harm, and we're trying to change the ways in which we do things.
Yeah.
Right? I think that most people that come to this field, they don't come to this field to cause harm. We come because we generally want to help, or we have a vision of a better world. We
Yeah.
want to help, walk with people while they
Right.
heal. We want to create a better future, even as a parent, a grandparent, an auntie, a future ancestor. So we have these desires, and then sometimes the systems that we work in can kind of get in the
Yeah.
way and can put us in positions where we're inadvertently harming. And so social work has, a bit of a dark
Yeah.
history. And I think it's important that we have to sit with that. When we think about truth and reconciliation, I think we often want to rush to reconciliation, right? Like, what do we do to make it better? How do we make it
Mm,
better and move on from this moment in time? And I think one of the things that we have to really do is sit with truth listening, right? Especially as non-Indigenous people or as a
right.
profession. We're representing a profession that has caused harm
Right.
in the past. We have to sit with listening to the truth of that. And so oftentimes when I'm teaching social workers, new social workers, they're really surprised about the history of our
Mm,
field.
mhm.
Yeah, and I was as well. I mean, I certainly didn't come to this field with any knowledge of that, um, not any lived knowledge or experience, but it's one of the ways that we have to account for what has
Right.
happened, right? We have to sit with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe just to get like my mind, like just to get a little more specific to help people relate to that, like my mind goes to like specifically when social, like connecting to the 60s
Mm.
scoop, for example, and just
Yep.
participating in those kinds of policies that were coming down from government.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Even residential
Yeah.
schools. I mean, social workers worked with the church and with the RCMP to
Yeah.
take children into the schools. And I really think about the residential school system as think about it as operationalizing this really racist ideology about what it meant to be
Mm,
Indigenous, what it meant to be
yeah.
white. Um, yeah. And so social workers were active parts in that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, the 60s
Right.
scoop happened, and then the millennial
Yeah.
scoop. There's actually more children in care now than there ever was at the height of the
Uh,
residential school.
yeah.
So it's
Yes.
ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's historical, but it's also a historical
Yes.
present, and that
Yeah.
it's really happening
Yeah.
right now. Yeah, and as First Nations start to take control over child welfare and education, we're hopefully starting to see some changes. Um, but I think we got a lot of
Yeah.
work to do.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Well, let's continue with unpacking what does it mean to
yep,
decolonize, because I see how these weave into each other. I mean, first of all, just
yeah.
understanding and being willing to think about what colonization is and how, like you say, it's an ongoing present reality, how we are swimming in it ourselves and participating in
Mm-hmm,
it and benefiting from it
mm-hmm,
possibly. And
mm-hmm,
so that I imagine is one of the first layers of creating the
mm-hmm.
conditions for
Yep.
decolonizing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think starting with that, when we think about our critical consciousness and our critical
Okay.
awareness, right? And so, one of the things that you talked about in having these like meaningful discussions when
Yeah.
are on
Yeah.
these Zoom calls with your family, you're raising that critical consciousness that, wait a minute, the story that we were told, the story that we
Right.
believed, the story that was sort of operationalized and we were educated about it literally within this public school system, that came from
Right.
somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And maybe that's not the only truth. So that sort of like light bulb
Mm-hmm.
moment, that's critical consciousness, that awareness. And then you take it further into critical thinking. Well, then where did that story come from?
Mm-hmm.
Because there isn't only one truth. And how come I heard that story and not the other story? And then who benefits
Mm,
from the story that we heard, right? So then you start to do that critical thinking. So when people talk about like unpacking an idea, really they're like they're asking those
right.
questions and they're looking through the
Right.
layers. So when I think about like, say, for example, my formal training as a social worker and a trauma therapist, well, where did that come from? And it's important knowledge, but there's other knowledge as well that's equally important,
Right.
right? And we'll talk about that later when we sort of talk about like weaving
Okay.
knowledges. But when we think about if one knowledge or one truth is the only one that we ever hear and we never
Right.
question it, well, it's always at the expense of something else,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that critical thinking and awareness is about really asking those tough
Yeah.
questions and then listening to the
Right.
truth, to another
Ah.
person's truth. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
as you say that, what that sparks in my mind is because the question that popped up while you said it is like, and but how do we find out what those questions are? You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and one of the ways with what you just said is through listening, but not just in an echo, like not just listening. We have to
Mm-hmm.
listen to other people. We have to listen to people from different
Mm-hmm.
walks of life and Indigenous,
Other
non-Indigenous, yeah, other
viewpoints.
viewpoints.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lee Miracle, in her book Raven Song, which I was rereading over the summer. I love that book. But one of the things she says is, where do you begin to tell someone that their world is not the only
Mm.
one?
Yeah.
Right? So when people start to tell their truths, like I'm sure today folks are listening to the truth of survivors. And so the world that people might have thought existed, when you listen to the truth of someone who's been violenced by that, you realize that there is a whole other world um, that we're tapping into and that we need to listen to and be responsive to. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You look like you had it
That's
up.
okay. Go ahead. No, I could go on and on and on. But
okay, let's just pick it. So you talked about critical consciousness and critical thinking, and just because you're naming those, I was looking through some of your writing, because I had the privilege of being able to review a little bit, and I know there's a third C.
Yeah, critical reflexivity. Yeah. And so folks listening will go, well, those are, those are concepts that I learned in school. How is this decolonizing? Right? Yeah, it's because those aren't necessarily, those words don't come from, say, an Indigenous language or a traditional sort of form of healing. But this is one of the ways that we can use both. I know we're going to talk about that in a bit, but we can also use both. And so then critical reflexivity is like, think about it as a verb. So I have the awareness, then I'm asking the questions, I'm doing critical thinking, and now I'm applying it to myself. So then how do I take up space as a social worker, even though my intention when I work with a person, a family, a community is not to harm, but by virtue of their truth of what social workers are, my presence already might evoke some really strong feelings from them, right? So it's really looking at how is my presence impacting other people. I'm often white coated. I'm very light skinned. So I also have to have those conversations with myself and others about white supremacy and how that may have benefited me, but always at the expense of somebody else.
Yeah.
So I'm not immediately violenced by being visually racialized.
Can you say that again? That felt like there was a lot in those words you just said. No, sorry. It's good. I just want to hear it again and have you unpack it a little.
I'm not immediately violenced because I'm not visibly racialized. Okay. So white supremacy offers me a level of protection where I'm not the target of racialized violence, right? Because I'm not visibly racialized. And so one of the things that happens when we begin to decolonize is we look at the really complex ways that these colonial ideologies and systems have harmed us, but then also we have to look at the ways that we might have benefited from it. And even that light skin protection, that's an uncomfortable benefit, right? It's not one that I asked for, but it's one that I have to be admitting that it came at somebody else's expense. And I think that's where that uncomfortable feeling comes in, right? When we have these big conversations. But one of the things I always say to my students and to people that I'm training is that uncomfortability that you feel is often a sign that things are shifting. So when we stay with it, that's when things start to change. Right? We're uncomfortable because like our foundation is shifting and oof, that doesn't feel good. I don't want to benefit from somebody else's oppression, but that's the nature of this, right?
Yeah. And I love that we've landed on talking about this a little bit, and I want to spend just a few more moments here if that's okay, because I feel like this is getting at some of that really nitty-gritty, like that in terms of for any person wherever they're at in this journey, like that feeling of whatever is the source, that feeling of uncomfortability, as you said. Because I know this for myself, and I think I understand this is true for the people, that I think because that is so uncomfortable, that's part of why we might resist or have some fear or have some anxiety or not want to go there. And there's an urge to get out of that feeling really quickly. So it's like, what do I do? What do I
Yes.
do? What do I do? Right.
Yeah. What's
What's
the
the
answer?
answer? Yeah.
And then, so that
Yeah.
uncomfortability is us sitting and
Yeah.
listening to
Yeah.
truth. That's listening to somebody else's truth
Yeah.
talk,
Yeah.
right? Even if it's as a concept, not as a direct conversation. But you and I are sitting with that truth,
Yeah. Yeah.
that white supremacy has benefited
Right.
some of
Yep.
us, if that's the truth that we're going to
Right.
talk
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And we have to sit with that and spend
Mm-hmm.
time in that. We can't rush to the
Right.
finish line,
Yeah.
right? So there's that urge to
Right.
leave, like you said. And sometimes people will talk about, as a critique of reconciliation, like we have to get to truth first,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? Before we can
Right. I've
get
heard that.
to
Yeah.
how do we
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
reconcile? Yeah. So we have to sit in truth
Yeah.
first. And I really want to emphasize that this isn't about guilt. This is about growth.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to this isn't about guilt. This is guilt. This is about growth for myself, for each other, for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. This is about that. And true decolonization doesn't happen in places of shame or blame,
Right. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think about Kathy Absalon. I can't remember where she wrote it, but she wrote, "In the absence of knowledge, we blame each other."
Mm-hmm.
And that really stuck with
Mm-hmm.
me because I thought that's so
Yeah.
true. In the absence of knowledge, we blame each
Yeah.
other. So it's easy to point
Right.
fingers, right, at each other, or to rush to that innocence that I didn't mean to do it. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't
Right.
know. I can't
Right.
help that I look like that. All those kind of ways of
Right.
deflecting,
Yeah.
because as counselors, we know when we sit with an uncomfortable feeling, our first urge is to jump
Right.
out of it,
Yeah.
right? Like we're often teaching our clients, no, you got to stay with the
Right.
feeling. You got to
Right.
stay with
Yeah.
it. And so I think that that's an important part
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
hope that's helpful to some folks to give that some language. I know it's always helpful for me to hear that again and again because it's
Hmm.
that notion of because we do want to know we need some kind of handhold. What am I trying like something to anchor our notion of how
Yeah.
do we know we're
Absolutely.
doing this right and maybe that's a
How do I
very
know I'm doing
uh,
this?
European thing to say. How do I know I'm doing it right? Right. So I will own that. But
And what does it mean to do it
exactly, how do
right?
I get it
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I don't know.
exactly. And also that we're going to get it
Right.
wrong. And that's
Right.
okay. And so the other thing that I think about is I go back to um, maybe some more traditional
Yeah.
Indigenous knowledge systems and ways of thinking about things. And that I remind myself that the emphasis is on the process, not the outcome. So
Mm.
the colonized part of my brain thinks about outcomes,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
deliverables, jobs, tasks,
Right.
goals, end game, moving on to the next. But then I remind myself that this is about being in good relation with each
Mm-hmm.
other, and that is
Yeah.
ongoing, and that it's really about the process. So we're engaging in the process and we're doing it together.
Yeah.
Because that's the other piece of it. We have different jobs to do, but they're important, and we're really
Right.
literally all in this together. I mean, when I think about how much that critical awareness has risen, even with things like the climate crisis, like we are literally
Right.
interdependent on each other in the land for
Yeah.
survival, right? So come back to that. Come back to the focus is on the
Yeah.
process. I don't have to rush to the finish line because there isn't one.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something to wrap our heads around. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I know there are so many probably different possible ways we might think about steps
Mhm.
or what this might look like.
Mhm.
But what else would you like to talk about in terms of just what does it mean to decolonize when we're thinking about our helping
Mm.
roles? Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. So one of the things I like to think about is, and actually Louise McKay, one of our elder at CTRI, she does this beautiful teaching about the ripples in the
Mm.
pond. And it was actually really funny when I was working. So I was working with a group of people to write the Decolonizing Manual. It's a collective work. There's, so many brilliant minds at TTRI that are helping with this. And when I was envisioning, I was looking for a vision or a metaphor about, well, what does it look like? And I thought about a ripple in the pond, about how then nothing is ever different to the ecosystem, not knowing that is actually one of the teachings that Louise shares. So it was kind of this funny moment where I came back to, oh, okay, well, it's kind of nice when you see that nod. And I think about the ripple in the pond, that we're starting with ourselves and then we're slowly moving outwards, right? So we start with ourselves in terms of, my own belief systems and my own ways of thinking and where that comes from and who benefits from that and who potentially is harmed by that way of thinking or that belief system or that way of knowing. And then when we move into our helping relationships with other people, we start to think about it in terms of when we're sitting with people and when they are coming to us for our help. I often think about it as they're on their own path of healing. And I have some offerings. It might be a traditional sort of storytelling maybe role that I play, or it might be using traditional medicines or something, or it might be my formal training, right? Whatever it might be, those are my offerings that I'm bringing into people's lives, and that they're taking that and then they're moving forward with that, but then it becomes their own.
Right. Yeah.
And so then it's theirs, right? Once we gift it, it's theirs. And they also have something to offer us. So this idea of reciprocity is really embedded in many Indigenous knowledge systems. This idea that really our work together is like a circle where it's reciprocal. So we're trying to acknowledge and minimize power imbalances, right? That one of us doesn't sort of have power over, or expert knowledge, and another one is coming for the expert knowledge. We're acknowledging that we both have a vast variety of knowledge and experiences, and that those are reciprocal. We're sharing them together.
Yeah. Yeah. So really, So for whatever our role is with folks, really thinking about trying to deconstruct a little bit, maybe some of our own assumptions of our own power and importance. And
importance is a good one. Yeah. I mean, and we worked really hard, studied for hours and wrote paper after paper after paper to get this knowledge. Right. And I know, because I'm still in it, right? I'm still obviously in academia, and I see that as very valuable knowledge, but I also see my lived experience. I see my relationship with the land as valuable knowledge. I see my relationships with other people and with knowledge keepers as very valuable knowledge, right? And that one sort of doesn't overpower the other one.
Yeah. Lovely. Well, and one of the things we did want to come back to, and I think we're starting to talk about already, is in your writing also you use that phrase of weaving knowledges as an important part of this. And so I think you're starting to talk about that in a way already. Do you want to expand on what does that mean to you, weaving knowledge?
For sure. So, I mean, it's certainly not a new concept. It's written about by so many different authors and thinkers, and so it's certainly not my concept, and it's not a new concept. When I think about it, there's a teaching about sweetgrass, for example. I always have sweetgrass on my desk. I love the smell of sweetgrass, mainly because it reminds me of being back home. It grows rampantly all over Thunder Bay, and so you step off the plane and you get this big inhale of that beautiful smell. And so for me, it's immediately grounding and obviously connected to good memory. But sweetgrass, we braid it. We dry it and we braid it. Very much like our hair, one strand is fragile on its own, but together, when we blend them together, it's very strong. And so when I think about the strength of being able to weave our knowledges, I think about some of the knowledge that you might come into with from your ancestors, your experiences, and your teachings, and how different that is from
Right.
mine. And that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
And that together we're pulling sort of the best of
Yeah.
both. And I think about even the term weaving, it's a verb. So think about this as a process that's not ending. It's not, okay, I did a certification and I can check that box and now it's done. I'm decolonized.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. Woo,
Yeah.
that was hard. And I'm done. I don't have to do
Yeah.
that again. Right? Think about it as a process. It's a
Right.
verb. Yeah. And so we're continuing to do it
Right.
because we're always
Yes.
learning. So we're always learning and
Yeah.
growing. And so we're always kind of blending and weaving these different
Yeah.
knowledges.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like to think about it that way, that it's a verb. That means I keep
Right.
doing
Yeah.
this.
Well,
Yeah.
and of course
Yeah.
my thoughts go back to earlier in our conversation, also that makes so much sense given the context you set, that this is colonization is an ongoing reality, right? And so
Mm, our resistance has
yeah,
to be
yeah,
too.
yeah. So that
Yeah.
makes really good
Yeah.
sense.
I think about too as, for me, I'm always sort of looking at connections between what's happening on the land and what's happening in our own relationships, for example. And in my research, that certainly looks at that, like the connections between violence on the land and violence in our bodies, for example, exploitation of the land and exploitation of our bodies. And when I think about, sometimes we think about things within the bubble that we
Right.
exist. So if I'm a therapist, and I'm a
Right.
trauma therapist, if I think about weaving knowledges just within the context even of healing from trauma, then I'm opening up to maybe a certain type of knowledge. But when I start to look at all knowledge as equal and valuable, I start to sort of open my eyes and open my mind to potentially learning from, say, knowledge that land defenders hold, and the stories and the messages that they hear, and how I'm weaving that into my understanding of trauma, healing, wellness, like all these concepts, right? So we're also sort of pushing outward against our own sort of bubble of knowledge that we tend to
Right.
exist in,
Yeah.
if
I
that
think
makes
so.
sense.
I'm wondering if um can you maybe try to share a couple of examples of just like how have you heard other people, or how have you maybe witnessed or seen people kind of apply this in their
Mm.
own
Hmm.
lives? Yeah.
Hmm. So there's been some really good work done in like Indigenous feminism, for example, about the how violence on the land is directly related to, from their perspective, to violence on women's
Mm-hmm.
bodies, and how those two things are
Right.
interconnected. And one of the things that I pull from that is that when we're honoring our our spaces and places in the land we're from, we're really honoring ourselves and each other. So sometimes we think about those things as separate,
Okay.
right? We think about like self determination and choice and
Yeah.
voice and body integrity. And we don't necessarily think about that as connected to maybe the climate crisis or land defense. But what a lot of land defenders and feminist researchers are saying is that they are very intimately
Mm-hmm.
connected. So the same sort of ideology that says that we can exploit the land and extract what we need from it is similar to the ideology of violence and exploitation of
Right.
bodies, of our
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
bodies, right, for
Yeah.
gain. And it links in with, of course, like capitalism and money and all those other kinds of things. So it's really interesting. But when I also come back to healing, one of the things that I often hear people that I work with and people that I walk with is that returning to the land, returning to cultural traditions, spiritual beliefs, really connecting with that helps them heal
Right.
too.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I think we're tapping into maybe some ancient knowledge that we're not as separate from the land as we like to think we
Right.
are. And so when we care for that and we nurture it, we're caring and nurturing for
Right.
ourselves as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
And Jolene, as just right now, what sparked in my mind was my very first question to you, and I'm connecting with what you said there, where I asked you about different hats, and you talked about how we live and work in systems that fragment us. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm hearing
Yeah.
that echoed now in what you're talking about, right? Of
Oh, we walked in
we
a circle.
did.
Look at that.
I love that. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, of just allowing ourselves to, kind of sit back and as we listen to be open to hearing noticing all these interconnections between all these different
Yep.
parts of our lives
Yep.
or our clients' lives. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I firmly believe that knowledge will come to you in ways that you often don't expect,
Hmm.
perhaps in ways that you didn't want it to.
Right.
But it comes to you for a reason. And I think about Indigenous storytelling, for example, and I can remember going to my gran,
Mhm.
um, and many people will resonate with this, whether it's Indigenous or non-Indigenous. And you go and you have a problem, and what do I do? And she says, "Well, let me tell you a story."
Right. Yeah.
And so you got to put the
Yeah.
kettle
Yeah.
on. Okay, we're going to be here
Yeah.
for a while. We're going to have tea, and it's in there
Yeah.
somewhere. But I have to find that little nugget of
Ah.
wisdom, right? I have to do the
Oh yeah.
work of finding it and making the connection.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not going to be directive. And most good storytellers will give you stories that unfold over
Right.
time. So that's the other beauty of like being in relation with people is that, as helpers and as someone being helped even, we're never quite sure when what something we said or what something someone else said will
Right.
resonate with us and make a
Yeah.
lot of sense, right? So we have this conversation today, and a month from now, something might happen to me, and I'll go, I remember when Vicki said that. That's what that meant. That makes
Right.
sense
Right.
now,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So they sort of stay with us, and then I think that's that beauty of that value of
Right.
interconnectivity.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very central to a lot of different Indigenous
Right.
knowledge systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Well, Jolene, as I suspected, we could easily, I feel like we've barely kind of
I
scraped the
feel like we
surface. Yeah.
just sat down. Yeah.
I know. That's how these things go. So, as I say to most of my guests, maybe all of them, sounds like you'll have to come back sometime so we can continue this
Absolutely.
conversation.
I feel like we just
I
got
know.
started.
But I still
Yeah.
want to give
Yeah.
you a chance to add a nugget if you'd like. I mean, I think you've
Mhm.
given our listeners lots of ways to think about this, but I always like to highlight. I always like to ask if there's maybe it's something we've already talked about you just want to lift up, or maybe there's another idea that you haven't
Mhm.
had a chance to say. But especially for maybe folks
Mhm.
that are listening where maybe this does feel like a newer topic, or they've heard about it but they haven't
Mhm.
really thought about it as something that they've been able to step into or really applying to themselves. And I'm
Mhm.
curious if there's something you want to highlight of just encouraging folks
Mhm.
to kind
Mhm.
of uh, try out or be able to step into
Yeah,
this a little.
absolutely. I think so. I think first of all, if you're listening, thank you for sitting with us and sort of walking in this circle
Yeah.
with us. Um, I think there are a lot of Indigenous
Mm,
writers who have so much wisdom that's already been shared. So I would encourage people to like
right.
continue. It maybe this sparked an interest.
Yeah.
Continue though. Reading from Indigenous writers, reading Indigenous literature. Um, what are the treaty responsibilities that you have
Mm,
in the area that you're actually living and working on right now. So doing that work. There's a great article by one of my mentors, Dr. Ruth Green, and she talks about what is a guest and what is a settler.
Yeah.
And I think for people that identify as settlers, it's helping to shift from, well, what does that actually mean? And what would it mean for me to be a good guest? Because we're guests. I'm guests on this land. This isn't my traditional territory. So how can I be a good guest to the people who are the traditional caretakers and also to the land itself? So doing that, expanding your own knowledge. And listening to other Indigenous writers. And I think for Indigenous people that are repowering, remembering, reconnecting with their heritage and with their belief systems and with each other, like to keep going, just to continue to keep going.
Love it. And I'll just note for our listeners, I mean, maybe I can connect with you and we can include in the show notes maybe a couple of links to some suggestions, maybe to the article you're mentioning or some authors that if you want
Absolutely.
so that folks.
I have a
I
whole
bet you
list.
Do. So we'll figure out a way to include a link for folks to be able to find out more.
There's a lot of good work that's been done. That's there. And as soon as you tap into it, then it'll lead you to another and another and another. Yeah.
And of course, we should come back around and just talk briefly. We'll also have a link to if people do want to find out more about the workshop that you're developing. Tell us a bit more where that's at right now, or when is it going to be available?
Oh, I feel like it's so close. It is so close. So I think we're actually we're almost at the end of this version of it. I have no doubt that that it'll be updated and like most knowledge and most stories, it will change with time, right? But from where we sit right now, we're almost finished, and I think we're actually ready to launch it at the end of October. So that will be very, very exciting. Good. Yeah, I'm really looking forward. And it's been such a pleasure to it's a team effort, and it's been such a pleasure to work with other people at CTRI.
Right. Lovely.
Really good group.
Wonderful. So so that's another way for listeners, if you're wanting to find out more, explore these ideas, there will be a workshop available through CTRI and I imagine other resources that are available on our website. So we'll include a link to the description for that and where people can find out more too. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, this has been fun. We have to talk again. It went by so fast.
Yeah, you probably didn't even get to the page 2 of your notes or anything. I know.
I know. I've got my talking notes, and I'm like,
Well, thank you so much, Jolene. As I anticipated, this was very delightful, and it's been really meaningful. And I'm not surprised. I've learned, and I appreciate that. You've sparked different ideas and reflection for me, and so. I look forward to thinking about that for the rest of my day. And I know it will be meaningful to our listeners too.
Oh, thank you so much. It truly was a pleasure to visit with you. Yep.
And to you, our listeners, thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and come back again for the next one in a month's time. And so until then, be well and stay curious.
Looking for free resources and training in the areas of trauma, counseling, and mental health? Be sure to check out our website at www.ctrinstitute.com.